Welcome to Transcendent. I'm Raya, and I'm the daughter.
And I'm Joe, and I'm the dad.
Dad, I've been watching videos recently on YouTube about UFOs.
UFOs?
Yes, I've been talking a lot about with the government and finally releasing secrets and things.
If you identify a UFO, it becomes an FO.
Yeah, I guess it does, doesn't it?
And if it lands, it's just an O.
This is a part of a series that we're doing talking about emotional issues that LGBTQ and allies can tend to go through. Last week, we talked about internal and external issues that are really more subjective, like the way that we feel about ourselves or the way that other people feel about us. But those are the kinds of things that everybody goes through. This week, we want to zero in on a couple of things that are unique to LGBTQ plus individuals specifically.
And not only discussing what they are, but also how to handle them yourself. What can I do about this? Are you going through that too? That type of thing.
So the first one is discrimination and minority stress. Those of us in the LGBTQ plus community will face prejudice and harassment or violence that can lead to chronic stress and trauma. We go through a lot of issues that folks outside of the LGBTQ plus community don't have to go through.
That's true.
Other minorities may experience something similar, but it's never exactly the same. We go through a different kind of discrimination and have to deal with a different set of stressors for being a minority.
A lot of times people think that those stresses that people go through are the people who are LGBTQ plus. But I want to add, those of us who are allies, we often go through the same thing. And I talked about that in an earlier podcast when you first came out and how difficult it was for me to really approach it with other people. And I still am in circles where people don't know that I have a transgender daughter. And I hear things and I wonder, should I say something? Should I confront this person, or isn't this an appropriate time? But I want to. In each case, I want to say, no, I don't accept that.
Right. I think I mentioned last week, I had a call just over a week ago from somebody calling into my company and made some kind of a joke about transgender people and had no idea that they were talking to a transgender person.
Right.
We talk sometimes about this term microaggressions. Now, people that are skeptical towards LGBTQ things can put this into, they talk about wokeism and how, everybody's all just, everybody's so scared about, you hurt my feelings. We can't have this any longer. The people being all sensitive to people saying things. However, what those people don't understand is that a microaggression is just a small thing that reminds you don't quite fit in. For instance, when I am at work and I have somebody call in and I'll ask, are we looking at coverage just for yourself today, or are we also looking for a spouse? And sometimes people will say, oh, yeah, so we want to do with my husband also. And then I know we're talking about the husband. But every now and then somebody will not tell me the gender of their spouse. And I got caught one time. And in fact, I know that we have a listener to this podcast because the person I got caught with ended up becoming a good friend and becoming a listener of this podcast. But she said, and my spouse may want to do this as well. And I said, oh, great. Well, when is a good time to meet with him? And she said, actually, that's my wife. And I felt very embarrassed. Now, this is one where that microaggression actually, it was one that I was committing. But the reason why I was doing it was because I feel in that situation that I don't want to out myself. And so every time I say, oh, well, what about your spouse? Now, I always feel like, well, if I'm being sensitive to this person and it turns out that their spouse is just their husband, are they thinking, oh, yeah, you're one of these woke people? And so then I'm nervous. The reason why I said to her, can we talk to your husband also, was because I was nervous at that point. I didn't want someone to judge me and, let on that I'm part of the LGBTQ plus community. And here I have a whole podcast. I am as out as you can be, and yet I was still really nervous. That's why these microaggressions are so hard. I don't want to have even that small little conflict with somebody that I have just outed myself as a member of the LGBTQ plus community.
Well, it isn't just you as a transgender person on that end. I get that all the time. I think everyone does now. That's not uncommon. Most people will say spouse. They don't say your wife or your husband. I think that's uncommon. I hear that very infrequently now.
Well, then the hard thing is then how do you respond? So if you just assume from there on, you're probably right. But without cueing somebody to the gender then of who their spouse is, it's easy to just assume. And
Yes.
in fact, for me, I feel like if I don't assume that, this is where I was feeling like I felt like it put me on the spot where and certainly this was not what she was intending to do at all. I think she, probably was also experiencing that of, we don't like to reveal. I remember a friend of mine, a friend from college, that when he would talk about his partner, now he's not married right now, but he's got a boyfriend. And we had a long conversation about how you learn at times to just subtly say, oh yeah, my partner is back at the home and they're making dinner right now.
Yep.
You find ways to say it without revealing the gender, and it's probably going to be fine, but probably is not definitely. Now, I've learned since then, I thought I am never going to make that mistake again, and I've had a couple times where I made sure I did not make the mistake. Somebody talked about their spouse or their partner, and I have not assumed what the gender was, and it turned out it was a same-sex couple, and I was so happy I got it right. But those are the kind of microaggressions we're talking about. Now, are these things a big deal? No. None of these are going to make or break my day. But it's a little thing that's a reminder to me and a reminder to others that we're not the norm.
So this is one of those things that we're talking about, the things that will flirt with your emotions, if I want to say it that way. It's something that could add concerns to you in some form or other, or to the other person in some form. And that is what makes a feeling of rejection, a feeling of discrimination, that type of thing. And I understand that.
Mm-hmm. We call that minority stress. Now, there's lots of kinds of minority stress. Anytime you're in a group that's different from you, you can feel it. So if you're the only man in a group and it's all women, I know you're going to feel that in that moment.
My wife, your mother, and I went to a picnic for her homemakers group. Homemakers is an organization. They have them all over. They're country folk.
Must have been back in the 80s, I think. I remember her talking about that.
Yeah. So I sat with all the guys. I really felt out of place.
Really?
I didn't understand what they were talking about. What? They were all dairy farmers.
Really?
Every single one. I had a hard time fitting in. I thought, well, I want to get connected with these guys, so I tried to change the subject. It didn't matter. That's all they talked about. They talked about working in the field, and they talked about with the price of grain, and I really knew I was not part of that community.
So if you tried to change the subject, they would change it back and talk
Yes.
about Bessie, their cow. or whatever. My story, I remember when I was in college and a friend said, you should sing with us in our gospel choir. And I thought, that sounds like a lot of fun. And it was my very first time feeling like a racial minority. It was a black choir, and there were, I think, 2 or maybe 3 white people in the whole choir of 50 people. And I felt very out of place. I felt like I don't understand the culture. Everyone was very welcoming. Nobody said you don't belong here, but I felt like I don't know what I'm doing. I don't understand the references. I just felt like I was out of place. I thought to myself, this is probably a good feeling for me, because probably anybody here, when they're out and about in the rest of the world, is feeling like I am right now. And I had no idea. It was my first time of really understanding what it feels like when the shoe is on the other foot.
Even though they were willing to let you in for a song.
Yes, they were. So how do we manage things like that?
There are lots of answers, and we don't have all the answers, but we have some. For example, if you're experiencing discrimination of some type, the first thing it helps to know, it's not about you. Yeah, if I'm being discriminated against because I have a different belief from somebody else, it isn't necessarily about me. Rejection from other people, including family or society, comes from their ignorance or their prejudice. It's not about you. It's not your worth. Remind yourself that their rejection doesn't define who you are.
Right. And it's important that we understand this is not an intellectual concept. What I mean by that is I'm very good at taking these principles, and I know that this is true. But when I'm in that situation, it doesn't matter that I know that, because when I'm being discriminated against, or I experience that microaggression, or I experience some form of discrimination in society, it doesn't matter what I know. I'm feeling it really hard. At that moment, I need to come back and remind myself. I need to tell myself, maybe in journaling, or I look in the mirror, or I just tell myself out loud, or maybe even silently, remember, Raya, this is not about you. Because it can feel very personal. Even when you know in your head that it's not, you can feel in your heart like, but this reflects on me. If you just take a moment to remind yourself, this is not about me, that can do wonders.
I could go back to this situation of me sitting with all of these dairy farmers. And they weren't rejecting me. They weren't mean to me or anything else, but clearly I didn't fit in. I couldn't fit in them no matter what I did, and they weren't trying to make me fit in. They were just more than anything else, I'd say, ignoring me. They went back to talking about their cattle, and they clearly didn't want to have any beef with me.
Right. You were an utter failure.
Oh, you're milking that, aren't you?
Another thing you can do, we need to make sure that we watch for our mental health. So it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to limit contact with people that don't respect your identity. When you're going into a situation where you know you're not going to be in a good place, it's okay to protect your mental health. It's okay to say, I'm only going to be here for a short amount of time. Or I'm not going to go to this thing today because I know it's not healthy for me.
Find safe spaces. Whether it's an LGBTQ community center, or maybe it's a P-flag group, an online group, or some affirming physical space, seek environments where you can feel seen, heard, and respected, and safe.
Right. This is really, really critical. When you're in a place, imagine yourself sitting with this group of dairy farmers, or sitting as a part of the choir when you're not part of the racial makeup of the group, or any of these other groups. And you can imagine how in that moment you would feel like, I don't quite fit in.
When we winter somewhere else, we have been going to a church down there, which is a very conservative church. The preacher is phenomenal. I mean, when he finishes a sermon, you want to stand up and applaud. But the more I go there, or the more I have been going there, the more I realize it all sounds really good until you discover they have some very hateful practices.
Oh,
Against LGBTQ
Yeah.
people and a variety of other things. And it's not, oh, yeah, well, you can come here, etc. No, they have some hateful practices.
Yeah.
And I just can't go there anymore. I decided
you
I'm
did.
going to go to a different
Yeah.
church because I want somebody that is going to not preach hate, but preach love.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And you had a conversation with the pastor about it. I remember you told me.
yes, I asked for 15 minutes, and he talked for an hour
Wow.
in a very positive way, in a very loving way with me. But that doesn't mean that the message isn't coming out.
Yeah. That's too bad.
And I just feel it's a conflict of their ideas and their thoughts with mine.
Yeah.
And there's always, by the way, a safe haven in the church. You just have to find the right one.
Right. And this concept of a safe space can get mocked in certain circles where you don't understand what it's like to experience this minority stress. If you've never experienced feeling like an outsider, you think, oh, come on, just toughen up, grow a thicker skin,
Yeah.
just get past it. But when you've experienced living as an outsider for a little bit, you realize how important it is to be able to find a community where you can go. I remember when I first transitioned, the community that I found was on the local campus. And they talked about, this is a safe space here. This was before I had ever heard anybody making fun of safe spaces. And I remember coming in and feeling like this is all so new for me and so different for me. I don't know how comfortable I am sharing with people yet, what I'm going through and who I am. And all of this is just really, really difficult. And the moment they said, this is a safe space. If you're LGBTQ, we will protect you here. I felt like these are my people.
Yeah.
I can finally be my authentic self and not have to keep my guard up about, are they going to be judging me? Are they going to be making fun of me? Are they going to look at me funny? Am I going to have to defend that I'm not a weirdo or I'm not a whatever? All of a sudden, I was with all people like me. And finding that safe space really made a huge difference for me to be able to then go back and feel like I can now face the world, especially in that first year or two when I had to learn everything. I had to learn how to wear a new wardrobe, and I had to learn how do I behave differently and what are the subtle cues that women have all learned, because you grew up learning that as girls, but I didn't learn it, and I discovered that I have to behave differently now, and how do I carry myself differently, and how do I talk differently? I was learning everything, and it felt overwhelming. So to suddenly find that community of people, oh, was that ever exactly what I needed? That carried me through.
And I think we found that same thing when we visited a people ag group, when we put on a program for them regarding our podcast. I was really feeling very comfortable there, and I could see everyone there was very comfortable. And the shared experiences made them really feel like, here's people that get it. They understand. And everybody, I feel, walked away re-energized by humanity, seeing that it is out there. It is out there, the kind of people that we are looking to be with. And it sure does make a difference.
I'm Monica Scarbin. I love listening to the Transcendent podcasts, probably because I've been a guest speaker. I've been listening to these podcasts for over 2 years now and have found them to be not only inspirational, but very informative and emotionally lifting to my spirits, especially when I'm not feeling very hot. I'm a supporter, and I'm glad to be a supporter. Please go to transcendent.com, click on support. By as little as $3 a month, you can cancel at any time.
Another big emotional issue that LGBTQ folks go through, especially those of us closer to the transgender side of the LGBTQ equation, are body image issues and gender dysphoria. Now, a lot of people experience body issue images just in our culture. It tends to be women, or surprisingly, in the LGBTQ community, it's a lot of gay men experience the same kind of pressures that straight women have to have the perfect body.
Really?
You find that lesbians and straight men don't tend to have a whole lot of body issues because, in general, women are not as concerned. Now, there's still a concern. Nobody wants to be living with a slob. But because men tend to be a lot more visually stimulated, and we're talking generalities here, tend to be more visually stimulated, that can put a lot of pressure on anyone that wants to be attractive to men to have the perfect body that would be attractive. And of course, then if you're transgender, add to that the whole sense that I want to feel good about my own body. I want to know that who I am on the outside is matching up with who I know I am on the inside. That can be a real challenge. I remember I didn't feel like I had a whole lot of body dysphoria myself, but it's only because I worked really hard to push it down. And once I finally got to the point where I said, I'm going to schedule a surgery. And I mean, this was a lot of talking through and working through. And we did a whole episode about the specific surgeries that I chose to get. Once I scheduled that, and I no longer had to keep pushing down, that last month, and especially the week or two before the surgery was done, were excruciating. I remember going through a time with some friends thinking, I don't know how I can get through this. I feel miserable about my body right now. I felt just terrible. I felt like I wanted to break down and cry. I felt like uncomfortable. I don't even know how to describe it. If you can think of a time where you felt really uncomfortable and really out of place, that's how I felt because of my body. And once I got that surgery done, I just felt so much better about myself.
Was that an instant thing that happened once you got the surgery done? Or did you have to, no pun intended, grow into it?
I think it's hard for me to remember exactly. But, at first, when you're healing up from everything, you don't really know. So it wasn't, it was like a week at least. I don't even remember. It's been long enough now. I don't remember quite how long. I was in the hospital for several days. And then it was a few days after that they could take off all the bandaging and everything. And for me to even see what my new body was. But I remember feeling just a level of satisfaction. Now, it was not an overwhelming amount of satisfaction. It wasn't like, wow, everything is perfect. It was one thing that had always felt wrong, now all of a sudden felt right. And it was a minor thing. But that minor thing now it's been 5 years, and I have noticed over those last 5 years that minor thing has come up many times, and over time that has made a huge difference.
You've eliminated the gender dysphoria.
Yes. Now, not entirely, because I still have things with my body that I see. I don't have an hourglass figure, and I wish that I did. I wish there was a way that I could get that. But you can't, I was born with the body that I have, and there are some things you can change and some things you can't change.
To get an hourglass figure takes time.
Oh, yes, it does. Like sands through the hourglass.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think this was even today or just yesterday, that I thought about my body as it is right now, and it just brought a smile to my face. I just felt like I am who I'm supposed to be.
Yeah. I get that. That is a comfortable feeling. And the other part of that is with gender affirmation, which is what I would call that gender affirmation says that you feel better about engaging in practices that affirm your gender identity, like picking out women's clothing or hairstyles, which I know you've done some work with that, or using affirming pronouns. All of those things, I'm sure, matter a lot, right?
Right.
And it makes you feel it's more empowering for you to align yourself with your true identity, right?
It really is. And if you've gone through, like what I went through, is feeling policed and then also policing myself, that I better never let myself go down the route of, I didn't know this at the time, but it was really the route of being authentic. I remember looking almost longingly at folks outside of my community, looking at artists or other people that I felt were living authentically, living their true lives, and feeling a sense of, I wish.
What about when you gather together? Sometimes, I don't think this happens with our social group a lot, but it does happen sometimes. We'll get into a group and the men will gather in one area and the women will gather in the other area. I don't see that so much anymore, but I think years ago you used to see that more often.
Yeah.
And would you feel uncomfortable if you were gathering with the women, or would you feel uncomfortable if you were gathering with the men? Does it make a difference?
I would feel uncomfortable gathering with the men.
Yeah.
I was actually a little worried about that. Am I going to feel socially? How will this work after I transition? Will I feel awkward gathering with the women? Not once. Not once have I ever felt like I'm out of place here. Instead, what I feel like is, wow, this is where I belong.
Yeah, you've probably been in a lot of situations now where nobody knows you're transgender and you gather with the women and it fits just fine.
Right. Or, yeah, it doesn't come up too much anymore. I can't think of the last time, but I do recall a time with a church that I was attending for a while that had a women's group. And now I was out to the pastor there. And so I knew for a fact that I was going to be welcomed there. And that felt so good. It felt so good to be a part of that women's group. I feel like those times have been, really, really good. Now, on the other hand, I still have some hobbies that are traditionally masculine. Those places I feel very out of place when I go to, for instance, I like to do some tabletop gaming. And tabletop gaming, especially for more role-playing or playing trading card games like Magic the Gathering or some of those, which I play because especially that game, because one of my kids likes to play.
Yep.
And then he'll take me to the local game store where we play. There might be one, maybe two women that are playing in a group full of 15 or 16 people. Those places I feel very out of place at.
Mm-hmm.
I feel uncomfortable. I feel like, and I push through it, but it no longer feels like I belong here. Yeah, that feels awkward for me.
Have you ever gotten involved with a group of women and felt out of place?
Sometimes if I'm with a group of straight women and they're all talking about their boyfriends and going on and on and on about their boyfriends, that feels a little bit like a dairy farmer.
Yeah.
And it feels like I can't relate at the same level as I would like to. And I can leave those conversations feeling a little bit drained. But that doesn't come up real often. And I can do a little bit of that. It's just if it goes on and on and on that I think it's another thing where I feel like in that moment, I feel like an outsider a little bit is probably why.
How about the women who gather and talk about their kids?
I can do that all day.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
I can do that all day because I have all kinds of things to share about my kids, and we have a lot in common that we can talk about with our kids. Absolutely.
Yeah. Where men get together and they usually talk about work
That's right.
or sports or something.
And I'm really grateful to no longer be expected to know how to speak about sports.
You mentioned that to me before.
Yeah. It's not really my wheelhouse. But one thing that is my wheelhouse is this podcast.
Yes, it is. And mine too. Yeah, this has become a very important part of my life right now.
I think both of us, we're glad to be here week after week, bringing helpful tips for you to live a positive life, to improve your relationships, to help you whether you're LGBTQ yourself or you know someone who is.
We will often refer to an earlier podcast. You can scroll back and you can find any one of our, at this point, I think 112 podcasts we have, dealing with a wide variety of subjects. There is something you're thinking about and you wonder, did we cover it? Probably we have. But if we didn't, and you want us to cover a specific topic,
Write us and let us know.
and how do we do that?
Transcendent@gmail.com. We read every email.
We want to interact with our audience. We encourage you to contact. And with that, we'll see you Monday.